Welcome to the podcast. My name is Father Bill W. I'm an Episcopal priest living here in Austin, Texas, and I've had the gift of recovery since December the 27th of 1972. Very, very grateful for that. Very interested in a form of prayer they used to do in the early days of AA. It's called two-way prayer. I invite you to go to our website of the same name and check that out. It seems to be helping a lot of people out there, and it's one of the lost vestiges, I think, of the early program, the pioneer program that I discovered about 30 some odd years ago and totally changed my life. So if your life is in need of changing, go check it out. Thank all the supporters who are contributing to the support of this podcast. That really helps. So we're putting things on YouTube and working on a book and keeping things going here. So we are now in a series that is centered now on the work of Viktor Frankl. And Frankl was, of course, a psychiatrist and the founder of something called Logotherapy. And here to help us understand Frankl's work is an old friend of mine, Tom Lavin, who lives out in Reno, Nevada. And Tom is a psychotherapist, marriage and family therapist, as well as a licensed clinical alcohol and drug counselor. And he's served for many years as adjunct faculty at the University of Nevada School of Medicine, Psychiatry, and Behavioral Sciences. Tom and I go back a long way. And for much of that time, Tom's been out there helping folks find greater meaning and purpose in their lives through the principles of Viktor Frankl, using them in a therapeutic setting. And Tom has a very helpful website, sends out regular newsletters. I've put it in the show notes so you can go there and sign up for it. He also has a Live Better TV series with a number of lectures, workshops, and handouts that take a deeper dive into some of the things we're discussing here. And they are now posted on YouTube as well. So I've put a link to those in the show notes. So Tom, welcome back. Good to see you.
Hey, Bill. Yeah, good morning. Good to see you.
Yeah. In the last few episodes, we've been going through Frankl's book, The Doctor and the Soul. And one of the topics that he addresses is a subject that is near and dear to my heart, namely anxiety, okay, or terror, existential angst. It goes by many names. And Frankl calls anxiety the disease of our time. It's an interesting name for an appellation. Hey, so let's begin maybe by examining what the heck is anxiety, and is it any more of a presence today in today's world than it was before? What do you think?
Oh, yeah, good question, Bill. First of all, I think it's important for us to be aware that from the point of view of the evolution and survival of the human species, anxiety has been key to that. Anxiety basically is good. Anxiety prepares us to deal with danger or to anticipate danger and plan to keep ourselves and our family and our tribe safe. Anxiety also helps us in terms of human relationships kind of monitor our connection or lack of connection with one another. Anxiety helps us focus and get into action when it's healthy. Now, when it's unhealthy, it paralyzes us and it really interferes with our life. And that's when we say anxiety is a problem, Bill, is when the intensity, frequency, and duration interferes with my functioning as a human being.
Kind of like alcohol, isn't it?
Yeah.
In and of itself, it's a good thing.
Yeah.
Until it goes crazy.
Yeah, good point, Bill. The key thing for Frankl is being conscious and responsible. We're going to talk about that today.
Right.
In our life, being awake and doing the right thing. And the other thing we want to talk about today in terms of anxiety, then, whether it's the clinical types of anxiety or the existential anxiety we'll talk about later, Bill, is how do we have our anxiety without our anxiety having us?
Mm-hmm.
Is what we'll be talking about. So anxiety, again, it helps us prepare, it helps us plan, it helps us be safe for ourselves and our family and our tribe. But we can start to overreact to it. We can become overly sensitive to stimuli that provokes anxiety. And again, it can go overboard in terms of frequency, intensity, and duration. And so we begin to have problems with sleep or nightmares or eating, either eating too much or not eating at all, getting into maladaptive coping like alcohol and drugs, gambling, sex, spending, to alleviate these symptoms of anxiety. And the symptoms, again, are like with sleep, with eating, muscle tension, mind racing, social withdrawal, lack of engagement. Like in terms of like a general family of anxiety, Bill, I want to include, just for today, we would think about generalized anxiety, which is pervasive worrying about like lions and tigers and bears, oh my, every day. Oh my, we're going through that where there's just this general feeling of lions and tigers and bears, oh my, something's going to jump out and get me.
Yeah.
We will call that generalized anxiety. Another very common type of anxiety we want to keep in mind today is social anxiety. And that is where we're not comfortable in our own skin. And we feel very uncomfortable being around other people. We don't know how to make that connection or communicate. We're afraid we're going to do something to shame ourselves or humiliate ourselves. So we tend to withdraw and be concerned about engaging. Now, within that family, we also want to consider PTSD, a severe reaction to trauma, where we have nightmares and we're hypervigilant, hypersensitive. We have a startle response. We're highly defensive. We're afraid of being vulnerable. And then we also want to include in our understanding today, Bill, obsessive compulsive disorder, which the obsessions are distressing thoughts about relationships and reassurance or sex or order. The thoughts are distressing, and then we get involved in compulsive behaviors like creating order or checking in with people or checking the garage door to make sure we closed it. We check in 15 times. So we engage in behaviors to reassure ourselves. Now, in all these types of anxiety, we want to include that maladaptive coping as a way to bring some comfort to relieve the distress when the frequency, intensity, and duration has gotten to be too high. And that's where alcohol and drugs and gambling and sex and spending come in, to provide a false sense of comfort and security. But the more we don't want anxiety, the more we have it. I'm talking here about avoidance and control, like pushing the beach ball underwater. When we start to feel anxiety, Bill, and we want to make it go away, so we push that beach ball underwater, like I'm showing right now on the video, where we push it underwater to try to make it go away. But the more we push it down, eventually it's going to pop right back up, isn't it? Where the stuff's going to hit the fan. So from a psychological perspective, so from stress, we would call this fight or flight. From a psychological perspective, Bill, pushing that beach ball underwater to try to make it go away, we call that avoidance or control. How can I avoid or control my anxiety? And the fact is, the more we try to avoid it or control it, the stronger and worse it gets.
And when people are maybe new to recovery, or sometimes even not so new, alcohol was a coping mechanism.
Oh, yeah.
That they used. And so oftentimes I'm not feeling better when I stop the drinking or drugging. I'm feeling stuff that I was able to get rid of in ways before.
Yeah. And that can be, like we will say, we refer to someone who has had an addictive disorder and they have anxiety or depression or PTSD or OCD or bipolar disorder. We call that a co-occurring disorder or a dual disorder. And so as bad as our lives have gotten with alcohol and drug use, when we make that commitment to one day at a time stop drinking or using or doing other addictive behaviors, yes, we start to feel the anxiety or the mood disorder, the uncomfortability. And so while some people feel so much better when they stop drinking or using or other addictive behaviors, other people feel worse for a period of time. And that's where there's a necessary requirement to learn to deal with anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, PTSD, etc. That's where, again, Bill, sometimes when we see people relapsing with their addictive disorder, we'll say, well, are you making meetings? Are you working your steps? Are you talking to your sponsor? That's very important. The other thing to look at, though, is do you have an undiagnosed mental health issue where that's causing you so much distress and you don't have the tools to deal with that? Then the back of your mind is euphoric memory. And so the person retreats back into the old behavior of the addictive disorder to get some relief from the oppression of the mental illness. We want to be aware of that in terms of responding to our brothers and sisters in recovery. And exactly what issues do they have to be dealing with to stay clean and sober one day at a time?
Would you say it's a pretty high percentage of people with
Bill,
co-occurring disorders?
Bill, as you know, back in the 70s, when we were trained, we just looked at alcohol and drugs as a unitary kind of thing.
That was it.
But in the 80s, we began to realize, and even more in the 90s, we began to realize that a very high percentage of people with addictive disorders do have a problem with anxiety or depression, PTSD, bipolar disorder. That needs to be addressed for the person to have a high quality or emotional sobriety. And also, it's part of relapse prevention is to treat that. There's research that's shown anywhere from 60 to 80% of the people who present with an addictive disorder, they also have a co-occurring disorder that needs to be addressed. You know, Bill, staying with being conscious and responsible, here I'm showing this finger trap, right? And so we know as kids, we were on the playground, somebody said, here, let's see if you can free yourself from this finger trap. And so we struggled against it to free ourselves. And it's the same way with anxiety, Bill. The more we struggle against it, the worse it gets. And so with the finger trap, as you know, and those listening in the podcast, just visualize this, where you lean into the finger trap, that's how you free up your finger.
The book says we stopped fighting everything and everyone.
Beautiful, yes.
Even Chinese puzzles.
Chinese finger traps, yes.
Finger traps, yeah.
And so like in DBT therapy, Bill, this is called distress tolerance.
DPT, now what's that?
Dialectical behavior therapy, which is kind of a sister therapy with acceptance and commitment therapy. Okay. And it has elements of logotherapy in it as well.
Okay.
The need to learn to tolerate distress. Like that's where in the program we will say this too will pass. To learn to tolerate distress, to not need to get immediate relief from the anxiety, which is what we're talking about today. To not need immediate relief, but to, when we're triggered, to know that the hypothalamus, pituitary, the adrenals, the amygdala are spitting out fight or flight chemicals, and it's going to be intense and it's going to make us very uncomfortable. And we need to know that it's going to reach a crescendo and then it will come back to baseline and we'll be okay. Part of the distress tolerance, Bill, and this is where we want to remember that anxiety can be healthy, which means when I'm feeling anxious and I want to make it go away, I don't want to give in to that feeling of I got to make this go away no matter what. I want to have distress tolerance, being able to sit with it and take a couple of breaths and say, what is this? What is my anxiety? Which is really, we're talking about the serenity prayer now, Bill. What is my anxiety telling me? Is my anxiety telling me I need to get into action and do something? I need the courage to change something, but my anxiety is keeping me from doing that. Or is my anxiety telling me, you need to go ahead and let go of this. I need the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. I'm having anxiety and it's saying, Tom, let go of this. Let go of this. And when we follow that wisdom, Bill, and we let go of what needs to be let go of, our anxiety is minimized. When we have the courage to change the things I can, and we engage in that action, our anxiety goes down. So
I'm going to switch the language just a little bit because it's the one that I'm more familiar with, but I think I'm tracking with you exactly. But Jung talks about shadow work. You know, it's not closing the door to the basement. It's allowing the shadow to come up. and through active imagination to even present itself, and we dialogue with it. What are
Yeah.
you trying to tell me?
Yes. Yeah.
Inappropriately. You're
Yes.
doing
Yeah.
it inappropriately, but you are trying to tell me something.
Yeah. And so being able to listen, being able to tolerate being
Yeah.
uncomfortable and
Right.
saying, what is this uncomfortability telling me? Anxiety also plays into, like in the 11th step of knowledge of God's will and the power to carry it out, our conscience. Our conscience is attuned to anxiety, and our anxiety may come up when in fact it's trying to tell us this would be a healthy or a good thing to do. You need to go ahead and do this.
Mm-hmm.
Again, anxiety can help us focus and it gives us energy to accomplish something.
Right.
So it will tell us, go in this direction. This is the way you need to go to make your life or other people's life better. Don't be paralyzed. Don't just sit there, do something. On the other hand, anxiety in terms of our conscious, we will become anxious if in fact we're off track, or the old timers would say we're off the beam, and we're actually going against our conscious and we're doing something that will hurt ourselves or hurt other people. We will feel, our anxiety will have us feel very uncomfortable and very bad. And so if we can tolerate that, Bill, and listen to it, our anxiety is saying, I need to stop doing this. I need to get back on track here.
Yeah.
I need to make amends.
I need to not drink today.
Yes.
I need to get through this day, or an hour, or a minute, whatever it may
Yeah.
be. It's breaking it down into workable time frames.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, good. Now, in his introductory chapter, Frankl breaks it down into 4 different perspectives. I'm not sure
Yeah.
what the correct title of it is, but
Well,
I'd
I
like
think
to go through those.
Frankl would call these flights from freedom and responsibility. In other words, flights away from our true humanity.
How
And
we run away from the
from our true
reality.
humanity. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
And so, of course, when Frankl originally wrote The Doctrine of the Soul, he was talking about the existential anxiety people felt after World War I, World War II, and then the atomic bomb. And people just doing their best to survive
Yeah,
one day at a time. And then with the atomic bomb, knowing that there's some existential crisis out there where somebody can push a button, or a couple of people can push different buttons, and then the whole world. So he was talking about that type of anxiety that has to do with realizing our own mortality, realizing the precariousness of life that we all have, and that we feel very anxious and feel very insecure in this world. Now, we can translate that into today as well.
yeah.
With floods, fire, famine, doom, defeat, and despair that continues to perpetuate itself through our world. We can just look around right now and see all of this happening in our world, and we can feel very insecure, be aware of our mortality, be aware, as the Buddhists talk about, the impermanence of life, and we will feel anxious about that. And instead of being aware of that, staying with that distress, and then knowing that I'm free and I can take responsibility to choose how I want to behave in the midst of this precarious world, he talks about these 4 things you referenced, Bill, a flight from freedom and responsibility, where we abnegate our freedom, we abnegate our responsibility and give it over.
What I was taught, and I'm so grateful for this, was an understanding of the depth of an unmanageable life.
Yeah.
I translate what you're saying into that language.
Uh-huh.
Our lives have become unmanageable.
Yes.
All
Good.
right.
Well
And
done.
that's not to do with alcohol, drugs, and the consequences. It's to do with the depth of the ego's inability, to be the answer for everything.
Yeah.
We need help.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
human condition is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And the human condition is to stand in need of assistance
Uh-huh.
from some source.
Yeah.
From some source. Oh, good. Okay. Well, I like the way you're presenting this. This is helpful. So let's run through the 4 things.
Okay,
the first
Bill.
one, he says, is a planless day-to-day attitude toward life.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah, that's where, again, going back to freedom and responsibility, that's the person that is not being conscious and responsible. They're not being intentional with their life. They're like a leaf being blown around in the autumn by the wind. I know you did a really good presentation on William James. William James said, what does it get you out of bed in the morning?
Mm-hmm.
And so these are people that really don't have much of a reason to get out of bed in the morning. They're on automatic pilot. And so they're living a life of quiet desperation. Or as T.S. Eliot said, I had the experience but missed the meaning. And so their lives are not fulfilling. As John Sanford said, they're just turning a crank. They're really not really living their life.
And they're not asking, what is life asking of me? They've just turned that part of their life off.
They turn it off. And then when that question might start to come up and it gets uncomfortable, that's where addictive behavior comes in. They turn it off. Like that song that says, I'd rather have a frontal lobotomy. I'd rather have a bottle in front of me than have a frontal lobotomy. One of my all-time
I never
favorite
heard
songs.
that one.
I'd rather have a bottle in front of me than have a frontal lobotomy. Yeah, so that's where, when these questions do come up and they cause uncomfortability, that's where the addictive behavior comes in, because that way I can turn all that stuff off and just tune it out. And so, that's where we see, 25 and 35-year-olds in their parents' basement, smoking weed, drinking their brains out and playing video games, and really not living their lives. So that's an example of what Frankl called like a retreat from truly living.
The second one is fairly close to that, I think.
Yeah.
A fatalist attitude toward life.
I think a good example for this is in psychology, there's that phenomenon of learned helplessness.
Yeah.
Where that experiment where they took a dog and it was in a cage that was divided in two, it would shock one part of the cage and it would jump over the division and be safe over here on this side where that it wasn't shocked. Then they would shock that part of the cage and it would jump over to be safe and not shocked in the other part of the cage. Then they started shocking both sides of the cage. And so the dog would jump to safety, but it wouldn't be safe. Then it would jump to safety and would be shocked. Jump to safety, it wouldn't. And so eventually the dog just laid there and got shocked and got shocked and got shocked. By the way, ethics do not allow those type of experiments to go on anymore. But what it showed, Bill, was learned helplessness.
I think they do in the Dakotas.
in the Dakotas, that's still allowed.
It's still allowed up there. Yeah. Sorry, guys, but might want to take a look at that.
No offense to our friends in the Dakotas right now.
No.
So again, we can have that experience, growing up in families that are violent or dysfunctional or where addiction, we can grow up in very insecure families, and we can grow up with a sense of learned helplessness, which is a sense that no matter what I do, nothing works.
Yeah.
No matter what I do, my life is not going to get better. So I'm going to be demoralized, and I'm just going to give up and give in. And I'm not going to really have a vision, which William James and Bill Wilson both talk about, have a vision for a better life and what I can do to create a better life and the courage to change the things I can. There's no such thing as the courage to change the things I can, because there's a deep belief, Bill, I can't have any influence over my life. I just have to suck it up. Yeah. You're born and then you die.
And these are some very basic things that you need to instill in a person.
Oh, yeah.
Before you start throwing the steps at them and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's part, I think, Bill, in the second step of coming to believe that power greater than ourselves can restore us to sanity, which is wholeness of body and mind, that coming to believe that, wow, I can be clean and sober and I can have a life. As I come to believe in this higher power, and then I see the higher power that's been active in the lives of my brothers and sisters in recovery. And if they can do it, I can do it. So maybe this can happen for me.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe I don't have to believe in learned helplessness.
Right. Good. The third point is a little difficult, so help us with this one.
Yeah.
Collective thinking.
Yeah.
Here's the quote. man would like to submerge himself in the masses.
Yeah.
Actually, he is only drowned in the masses.
Yeah.
He abandons himself as a free and responsible being.
Yeah. Yeah. Viktor Frankl was very wise to point this out, Bill, and we see it. It's really very pervasive in our lives when we step back and look at this. Like right now, they're just finishing up a series on HBO on Synanon.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened in Synanon, people that were suffering at the beginning turned to Synanon. Synanon helped them get clean and sober. And then Synanon said, you need to turn your will and your life over to me. Chuck Diedrich said, turn your will and your life over to me. I'm going to tell you to cut your hair. You're going to wear farmer's jeans. You're going to do this kind of work. You're going to live here in our community. You're not going to have your own thoughts. You're going to do basically what I tell you to do. And so we see this again, like with that guru down in Arizona that was doing sweat lodges for people for $10,000 for a weekend. Be a spiritual warrior. I can help you feel secure and have a better life for $10,000 this weekend. And people just turned their will and their life over to him. And they stayed in the sweat lodge, even though they were dying. And they died in the sweat lodge because he said, stay in the sweat lodge, don't go. Eric Fromm wrote that book, Escape from Freedom, where as much as we want to be free, we will give that up because the idea of being responsible for our life terrifies us. And so out of that terror of making a decision, we give that up to other people. And whether that's political organizations, church organizations, different cults. And, Bill, I hate to kind of say this, but sometimes we've seen that in recovery groups too, where there's a really charismatic sponsor who begins to and has a good message, but then things can go off the rails, and maybe pride comes in and some hubris, and people say, you're helping me so much, and all of a sudden the sponsor's head gets big. They're sponsoring 20 people in the home group. The home group kind of starts to become like a little cult, and then that kind of takes us to the next one, where they're telling other people in the home group, we're doing AA the right way, and you're doing it the wrong way. You need to do it our way. That's an example then, Bill, of what Frankl's talking about here.
Yeah, so that you've brought us into the fourth one. So let me read the quote on that. So the fourth symptom is fanaticism.
Yeah.
And Frankl writes, while the collective, the group, so to speak, ignores his own personality, the fanatic ignores that of the other man, the man who thinks differently. Only his own opinion is valid. In reality, his opinions are those of the group, and he does not really have them. His opinions have him.
Yeah.
So what you're saying, and I couldn't agree more, that there's a lot of fanaticism these days.
Well, Bill, it goes back to that, as you said at the beginning, these are maladaptive responses to anxiety and not being able to tolerate anxiety. So it's a flight toward pseudo life and pseudo security.
I'm not going to grow up. I'm not going to be responsible.
Yeah.
I'm going to turn all of that over to you.
Yeah. Yeah. To a
and
leader
or to a group. You protect me from that.
Yeah. And then like you were talking about fanaticism at the end, and that is our inability to tolerate the grayness of life and the ambiguity of life and like live and let live. We can't tolerate that. So it's like we get into black and white thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And so we stick with a group that believes in our black and what our white is, and everybody else is wrong and we're right. And we're going to make you think this way. And if you don't, we're going to punish you or ostracize you or denigrate your beliefs. And so live and let live is the exact opposite of that. I trust myself to listen to my higher power and follow the guidance of God in my life, the higher power in my life. And I trust that you're doing that same thing. But if we can't tolerate live and let live, we will go toward fanaticism. And this is the way it's supposed to be. And if you're not doing it this way, you're doing it wrong. And I feel secure and my anxiety is diminished because I know I'm right. And I'm here with my friends who think the same way. So now, again, that's a pseudo therapy for anxiety. It's basically, Bill, again, going back, it's the way of pushing the beach ball underwater. It's the way of pushing that anxiety underwater. But in the long run, just like we see with Synanon or the cult in Arizona, eventually the stuff hits the fan. You can only push that underwater for so long, and then the stuff hits the fan.
It's going to come up, and it's going to come up violently.
Yes, it will.
Oftentimes.
Yeah, yeah. And, the same thing happened, Bill, in Nazi Germany with the anxiety that people felt after World War I, and the unemployment rate and the poverty and the humiliation that the German people felt. And so Hitler and other people played on that. And so if you join the brown shirts and if you join us, we're going to be creating something where you can feel good about yourself and we'll have a sense of security. And they played exactly on that. And we saw what that fanaticism did throughout the world.
Edward Edinger, Ego and Archetype. I'll try to remember to put a link to that in the show notes too. Marvelous description of how religion for many centuries was the container that would allow for this. And now that religion is receding in its ability to provide that for us, people are looking for alternatives. And it can go to isms. You're saying Nazism, fascism, religious fanatics of all types, and 12-step recovery is not immune from that. You got to be aware of that and on the lookout for it.
And I think part of the beauty of the traditions of 12-step groups, it hasn't allowed that to happen to any great degree. Now, it does happen in small groups.
It happens. But if they have done, if they've done about the best they can to minimize it's happening.
I
agree with that.
And so there's a balance, Bill, I think, between being in tune with the group and being aware of the ethos and the morality and the principles of the group, but then also not totally surrendering our autonomy. And this is where, maintaining our own conscious contact with our higher power, being aware of both dynamics, live and let live. So sometimes, when we're young in the program, when people are young in the program and feeling still kind of lost and finding their way, the guidance of a sponsor can be so helpful.
But we deify our sponsors.
But then that's where it can cross the line.
Right.
Where we're no longer thinking for ourselves. We're no longer looking for guidance from our higher power.
Right.
We're just doing what our sponsor tells us to do.
Great fear and trepidation if I do something that might anger or annoy my sponsor. Same thing, Tom, can happen with a therapist. I mean, you're really talking about transference.
Oh, yeah.
And you're talking about countertransference, because the therapist who enjoys this stuff and it takes on the power, look out for that. That can be dangerous too.
Yeah, Bill, I don't know, maybe in the future, I don't know if we're going to talk about what people might look for in a therapist, but we can, maybe at a future time, we might talk more and more about that. That dynamic.
I want to do one episode on the practical applications of logotherapy.
Okay.
So 5 or 6 things, and that would certainly be one of them.
Okay, good.
So let's carry on here.
Okay, Bill.
See if we can't get through more of this than we usually do.
All right.
Frankl says all 4 symptoms that we just went through can be traced back to man's fear of responsibility and his escape from freedom, giving up our freedom. Yet responsibility and freedom compromise the spiritual domain of man. Oh, that's so beautifully said. We're intended to be free.
And Bill, let me talk about one other thing, if I might. I brought this up, I think, in our first conversation, where as a young man, Frankl being brought up where society, in Vienna, academia was totally enamored with chemistry and biology and physics. And they began to look at human beings as just biological and chemical processes. And Frankl rebelled against that. And He said, no, you're reducing human beings to the lowest common denominator. We see the same thing happen in our society today. It's really pervasive with a lot of, in academia and in pop psychology. And if you take a look at certain gurus on YouTube, certain books that are being published,
Right.
there's a biologist from Stanford who basically is promoting that human beings do not have free will. And this is being echoed again by a neuroscientist who's very popular on YouTube, who says human beings have no free will. Basically, we're just our DNA and our genetic predispositions and the social factors that influence us. That's what's making the decision. We do not have free will.
Yeah.
And so again, I'm reminded when I see how popular these people are becoming that we want to, I think, look at Frankl's paradigm that yes, there is a physical, mental, emotional dimension. We want to honor that, but there is also a spiritual dimension, and we want to include that because that's what a total human being is physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, and social.
Right.
And if we take the spiritual out, like this biologist, he studies baboons. If we take the spiritual out, we're just baboons that have just a different evolution to our frontal cortex, and that's all we are. And so with that paradigm, spirituality is removed. And of course, this person is free to think that way because he has free choice. If he wants to think that way, he can.
And much of what they have to say can be beneficial.
Very
I
beneficial.
mean, it's like science. We're not at war with science.
No.
But science has its limits.
Yes.
And a good scientist knows that.
Again, like people like William James.
Right.
And Viktor Frankl and Carl Jung and Bill Wilson would say, yes, all of that, the holistic dimension is important.
So he lists freedom in the face of three things, and this is what we're really getting at. The first is the instincts. Man has instincts, and it's not the other way around, where the instincts have him or her.
Yeah.
All right. It's a subtle distinction, but it's exactly what you're talking about, Tom.
Yeah. We're, again, like Frankl would say, yes, we have instincts have enabled us to survive, and we want to pay attention to those.
Right.
But there is a deeper dimension that can animate those instincts when we allow it to. And because as we talked about, Bill, before, Bill Wilson talks about this in the 6th and 7th step, maybe even in the 5th step of the 12 and 12 about instincts on rampage, Balkan investigation, or where our instincts were demanding too much,
right?
That our instinctual drives be fulfilled. Yeah. And so Frankl would say conscious and spirituality help mitigate that and help maintain it in healthy boundaries where we allow our instincts to help us thrive and survive and flourish, but not to the detriment of ourselves or other people or the planet.
Very important. Inheritance. We may be born with traits, but we are not bound by them. This is back to that level of freedom that marks us as a species, and that's the spiritual dimension.
Frankl might say, given our genetics, we might have a genetic predisposition combined with social structures to develop problems with anxiety or depression or bipolar disorder or PTSD. We may be more sensitive to that.
Right.
However, that doesn't have to be the determining factor.
Right.
There are things that we can do to address that, and we can also adopt an attitude toward that so that we have our anxiety without our anxiety having us. We have our depression without our depression having us.
And we have no need to deny that either.
Right.
Because in the madness of addiction, the thought of returning to alcohol, now that I'm this number of years sober, well, surely I'm a different man or woman now. I can handle it. So you're going to deny the physical or the inherited factors.
Biologically, since we're talking about this holistic perspective, and I think it's less contentious in recovery groups as it was in the 70s and 80s, but this is where sometimes medication can be helpful to people. I think in recovery groups, we've seen how that's helped so many people stay in recovery, and also the quality of their life has been enhanced. And, Bill talked about this, Bill Wilson, in terms of having an open mind.
Yeah.
And so for some people, biological interventions might be helpful to help deal with the thyroid or deal with serotonin or dopamine, and to be open to working with medical professionals if that can be helpful to some people in dealing with PTSD or bipolar disorder or severe depression or anxiety that cannot be helped. It continues to persist and basically undermine the quality of life of a person in recovery. So sometimes biological interventions can help.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let me deal with the environment here. The last one, he says, as for environment, we know that it does not make man,
Yeah,
but that everything depends on what man makes of it, on his attitude towards it. And
yeah,
this is the classic where, and this is why Frankl helped me. He's in the concentration camp, and
yeah,
my life looks like crap, but the first year, but it didn't look that bad.
yeah, yeah. There are people that will want to say our environment is determinative of the rest of our life.
Right.
Like if you're an adult child of an alcoholic, the die is cast. You're going to have these problems now for the rest of your life, and you're
Mhm.
going to have a certain personality.
Right.
If you're raised in the projects in Chicago, this is the way your life is going to be. You have no chance of breaking out of that.
Mhm.
And so Frankl says, of course, these things influence us, but they are not determinative. We are able to transcend that. Part of being able to transcend that is someone telling us you can
You
transcend
can
that.
transcend it, right?
Yeah. And of
Yeah.
course, that's where the fellowship comes in, is that people will say, if you want what we have, you can transcend this.
And this is also where decisions
Yeah.
come in. Here's a quote from Frankl: "Man makes a decision. Man ultimately decides for himself, and in the end, education must be education toward the ability to decide." The word decision, and it sent me to step three, thinking about that. We may
Yeah.
have instincts, we may have hereditary factors, we may live in a lousy environment, but nothing can take away our ability to make a decision.
Yeah. Bill, the word decide, the etymology of that means to cut in half, which means when we decide we cut something in half, there's no going back.
Yeah.
So we fully give ourselves to this. I'm deciding this and I give myself to that. I'm fully engaged. I'm being intentional. In terms of responsibility, Frankl would also frequently say the decision the person makes is not always that important. What's important is they were willing to make a decision, to take that responsibility upon themselves for the direction and quality of their life.
I don't know if this is God's will, but I've done the very best I can.
Uh-huh.
And now I'm going to take the plunge.
Yes, that's exactly what Frankl would say, that we
Yeah.
can never really know the outcome of a decision we're going to make, which sometimes freezes us and keeps us from making a decision. But it's saying, I'm going to do everything I can. I've talked with people about it. I've journaled
Right.
about it, prayed about it. I'm going to go in this direction. And that's where we turn it over to our higher power. We take the action and we leave the results up to life, and let's see what happens. But I've done everything I can do.
And Henry Drummond says something interesting in that regard. He was influential in the Oxford group. He says, once you've done that, and you've done it to the very best of your ability, don't look back. That's where the rumination can come.
Yes,
and,
it can.
and spin around.
Yeah, and that's where our perfectionism can get in the way, where it really paralyzes us, or we turn to someone else to make the decision for us. Either where
Right.
we keep asking somebody, or we get involved in passive aggressive behavior where finally somebody reacts, like our spouse or our boss or somebody, and they make the decision for us. So we abnegate our responsibility through those two ways, Bill.
It's huge. It's our abilities are huge if we
Yeah,
will really kind of get in touch with them.
Yes.
and
Yeah.
the opportunity for freedom that is afforded us
Yeah.
if we will pay the price.
Yeah. Now, the other thing, Bill, about this important about decision, I think, for all of us in terms of the quality of our life is that the decisions that we're making in our life today are creating our future. We want to just be today. Let the future be what it is. What's in front of me today? What decisions do I have to make that are
Today.
loving and kind and courageous and vibrant and life-giving and purposeful and meaningful, and trust that and do what's in front of me today and trust that that's how the future is being created then.
One of the things I've, in studying two-way prayer and how they used to do it, I mean, there's the great big decision, the life-changing,
Yeah.
life vocational decisions. Those are biggies.
Yeah.
But I always include in my two-way prayer for today.
Uh-huh.
What's being asked of me today? And I look
Yeah.
at the day ahead and I write down 5 or 6 things and I check them out by the 4 absolutes. Are they honest, pure, unselfish, loving? And then go ahead and do them.
Yeah. That's a nice paradigm, Bill. That's
Yeah,
really nice.
do
Yeah.
them. And I check myself the next day. Did I do them? Now, was it God's will? Is God sitting up in heaven saying, well, I want you to do this and pointing a big finger at? I don't think so.
Yeah. No.
Well, what it's doing for me is it's putting my ego in a subservient. I don't like that word, but I'm here to do God's will, not my own.
Yeah.
Here's because I think that's where the decision leads in step 3. Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we didn't understand him. I think would be a better thing, but we'll take what we get.
Yeah.
And then be about to. Here's a nice quote from Frankl that really kind of sums this up. He says, logotherapy can be helpful, for it can give the patient that firm spiritual support which the healthy, ordinary person does not so much need, but which a psychically insecure person, I'm raising my hand, urgently requires to bolster up his insecurity. In no case should the spiritual problem of a person be written off as a symptom.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh, that's so good.
Yeah. And William James said the same thing in Varieties of Religious Experience, the healthy-minded and the sick-minded person.
Right.
Exactly the same thing.
If you are healthy-minded, you should not be listening to this podcast. we try to run those people off as quickly as possible. But if you're the unhealthy-minded, this is a good place to come, because we're not going to say, oh, bad you. We're going to say, oh, welcome. We think like that too, and we need help.
And that it's healthy to be searching.
Right.
It's healthy to be wanting to grow and continue to develop and be the fullest person we can be.
Those normal people, Tom, are sicker than hell. I mean, you go to a conference. How about them cowboys? How about them cowboys? Oh, come on.
Yeah.
If that's the depth of your neuroses, I'm not very interested in you. Because you're playing with the group. You're staying with the herd.
Yeah.
And the herd is going nowhere.
Yeah. And, Bill, along those lines, sometimes with patients that are working with me and consulting with me, when I talk with them about their pain and suffering, I'll suggest to them that this, in fact, is a blessing in disguise.
Yeah.
Just like a muscle, to get stronger, it needs to break down. Sometimes as human beings, we need to break down, and we can rebound from that through attitudinal values that Frankl talks about, and we can be stronger than ever.
Right.
And with that depth of that suffering, we grow in wisdom about life, and we grow in compassion toward other people who are suffering. And from our wisdom, we can share with them then our experience, strength, and hope.
And this is why that higher power is so important. Because when the ego collapses, falls apart, bottoms out, whatever we want to call it, the pieces can be put together differently. and put together more humbly, so that the connection to the greater self, the voice within, comes together differently. So in the end, usually not when you're going through it, but you can look back and say, well, it took what it took, and it took that for me, the coming apart,
Yeah.
because I put it back together.
And sometimes we'll say it's a blessing in disguise.
Right. Frankl has a couple of great quotes, and I think we'll try to end on these. He says, psychotherapy has given too little attention to the spiritual reality of man. For the aim of the psychotherapist should be to bring out the ultimate possibilities of the patient, to realize his or her latent values, remembering the aphorism of Goethe. And here's Goethe's quote: "If we take people where they are, we make them worse. If we treat them as if they were what they ought to be, we help them to become what they are capable of becoming."
Yes.
I get into a lot of discussions with people on the nature of 6 and 7, because they're given a very short amount of attention in the big book, and they're huge. And people will say, well, that's perfection, and perfection gets me into trouble, and I'm a perfectionist. No, I think it's saying what this is saying. You are capable of so much more.
Yeah. Yeah.
Become all that you are capable of being. You're going to fall short, but aim for the high, not for the low.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's where, it's important that we have role models in our life where we see certain people or certain traits in people and we aspire to be like that.
You and I had a role model that we shared. Floyd Lawton was his name.
God bless Floyd. Yeah.
God bless Floyd.
Yeah.
And,
Wonderful guy.
And Floyd had 11 years on Skid Row.
Yeah.
He did postgraduate work there. It was amazing. And he had really great wisdom. And he would meet people where they are.
Oh, yeah.
And he could see within you and me, let's get real personal here.
Yeah.
That there was potential there that was not being realized.
Yeah.
And he made it safe and helped us to access it.
Yeah. 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 I'm so grateful to Floyd.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was a great man.
Yeah.
And Floyd had an expression that I loved. It never kind of caught on in 12 steps. Should have. But he used to talk about people having a limited conversion. He said, Bill, you're going to meet a lot of people out there who have undergone limited conversions. They've gotten a little bit of the program, but they're settling for stuff. They're not going the full length. Mm-hmm. He said, I want you to go to the full length, because it's limitless.
Yes.
And if you can kind of catch what that is about, then you have set off on a spiritual journey of recovery.
Yes.
I mean, mine's gone on 51 years.
Yeah.
And I still feel like a newcomer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because the goal is high. Yeah, he didn't quote Auntie Mame, but I love the quote. There's a line in the play that say, life's a banquet, and most poor bastards are starving to death.
Yeah. Logotherapy is about that.
Yeah.
12 steps are about that. It's about aspiring to be happy, joyous, and free, and to live a full life. And that's available to us one day at a time. It is, Bill.
It's spiritual growth. And that does not mean religious necessarily affiliation. It means getting in touch with the spirit that is within each of us.
Yeah.
You can call it the God within, the great reality within.
It's
trying to incarnate in us.
Yes. Well put.
And we have a choice in that. Another nice quote in this section: the man I am greets mournfully the man I might have been.
Yeah. Isn't that powerful?
Woo!
Yeah.
Ooh.
For me, when I've read that, for me, it brings back the urgency of today.
Yes.
What decisions am I making today that are congruent with practicing these principles in all my affairs, so that I'm living a life that's congruent with those principles, and I know thereby I'm living a fulfilling life.
And one of the things about the human condition is it's never too late to change.
Well put. That's right.
It's never too late to say, and that's starting now.
Yeah. And hopefully we're always being willing to change and grow, huh?
Right.
In ACT, we refer to that as psychological flexibility. To not be so rigid, but psychologically flexible. And again, Bill, this is where healthy anxiety can prompt us to want to grow and can also let us know when we're off the beam and we're no longer growing, we might be going backwards. Our anxiety will tell us you're in danger right now.
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, people talk about being happy, joyous, and free. And it's like, oh, if I'm not, there's something terrible. No, no. There's an indication that something's not right.
Yeah.
Let's see what that is, make an adjustment, and move on. Move on.
That's also true with depression, where sometimes it's good to listen to our depression.
Right.
What is my depression telling me? I don't necessarily need to take medication or go to therapy. What am I depressed about? And what does that tell? Like, again, like two-way prayer, right? 10th and 11th step.
Yeah.
What is my depression saying to me about the quality of my life and what I'm doing with my life?
Yeah.
I'll just leave it there for now, Bill.
Yeah. And this is where active imagination really comes to the fore. Allow that depression to speak to me. Write it down in a book. Put it on paper. It's not going to bite you. You're bringing it out of the shadow.
Yes.
And you're facing it. We will get into some more of these things because going forward, Tom, I'd like to look at some of the more practical applications of logotherapy, particularly for someone who's in recovery, because that's where most of our folks are. Yeah.
Okay, Bill.
Okay. We went a little bit over, but that's good. That's all fine. We're breaking free, buddy. Clock says 60 minutes. The hell with it. We're going 65, whatever it might be. Okay. Hey, Tom, thank you so much. I think this was a very, very helpful episode. And you come back next week and we'll dig around and find some more stuff to throw at them.
Yeah, Bill, good spending time with you. Take care. Have a good day.
You as well. All right. Take good care. Thank you guys for listening. Hope you found it helpful. If you did, pass this on to other people. Bring them into the fun. Recovery is a ball. All right. Take good care. God bless and keep coming back.